In the early 2010s, a rumor began to circulate online. A piece of music in the original Pokémon was making children sick. The track in question played in Lavender Town, a somber area in the game associated with death. According to the story, some children experienced headaches, nausea, even psychological distress after hearing it. No official cases were ever documented, and the claim was quickly debunked. But the rumor stuck around. The sense of unease it tapped into, the idea that something in the game wasn't quite right, continued to resonate. The so-called Lavender Town Syndrome didn't come from journals or press releases. It germinated in a substrate where urban legends like to grow. Image boards, creepypasta threads, the loamy subsurface of fan forums. The claim had the shape of technical knowledge, so-called hidden frequencies in the Japanese release said to destabilize young minds. There are indeed sharp, detuned pulses in that particular musical cue. The track isn't glitched per se, but its mood clashes with the rest of the game so strongly that it creates a kind of eerie cognitive dissonance. What is this place? There was never any valid evidence of Lavender Town Syndrome, and pretty much any user with a modicum of media literacy was able to correctly identify it as nothing more than an elaborate creepypasta. But the rumor stuck because the music genuinely felt off, thin, shrill, and strangely dissonant. It sounds less like background music and more like something leaking through the system, something not meant to be heard. It gave shape to an unease players already had but couldn't quite articulate. That's why it spread. In a sense, that's why all urban legends spread, not because of their truth value per se, but rather their ability to transfigure a certain ambient vibe into a broader cultural narrative. It was a way of naming something real. The uncanny atmosphere of Lavender Town, and the funereal emotional register it introduced into an otherwise cheerful game. Pokémon is, at its core, a game about cataloging. You enter the tall grass and meet a creature, bizarre, unfamiliar, and basically hostile. Well, unless it's a Metapod, or a Magikarp. But in any case, you trap it, label it, and file it away. Its mystery is summarily collapsed into raw data. Type, stats, moves. Virtually every aspect of the game can be understood via metrics and ruthless categorization. Type tables, damage ranges, or encounter rates, etc. Through repetition, the world gradually starts to lose its ambiguity. It becomes knowable, sortable, and, above all else, exploitable. This is gameplay as taxonomy. The lesson is clear enough. Everything, given time, becomes apprehendable. And once the thing is apprehendable, it becomes potentially usable. This was many kids' first real course in making the unknown manageable. And it's comforting, in a way, knowing you can come across a strange new creature, capture it, and learn everything there is to know about it. It makes the world seem rational. But then you reach Lavender Town. When you enter Lavender Town, the tone shifts immediately. The music is sparse and dissonant, less a melody than a mood. It sounds like mourning, atonal, uneasy, like a dial tone played at a wake. You arrive in a tower filled with headstones. Ghosts drift through the halls, but you cannot catch them. When you attempt to fight them, the system fails. The Pokémon you have come to rely on falter in the face of the unknown. Your screen reads, "It's too scared to move." It's the only moment in the game where your usual methods, capture, control, progression, simply do not work. To proceed, you're forced to leave and obtain a special device, the Silph scope. It doesn't make the ghosts go away, it just gives them names. What was once a vague threat becomes categorized. Ghastly, Haunter, the first-gen ghost Pokémon we've all come to know and love. The fear subsequently lifts because the unknown has been converted into information. The system works. Eventually, you reached a fixed encounter, the ghost of a Marowak, killed by Team Rocket while defending her child. You can't catch her, you can't train her. She isn't part of the basic loop you've been conditioned to expect throughout the entire game up until this point. All you can do is witness the event and lay her to rest. It's the only time the game lets death remain what it is, irreversible. What makes the Marowak encounter so unusual is that up to this point, Pokemon has carefully avoided the subject of death. When your Pokemon lose a battle, they don't die, they faint. You take them to a nearby Pokemon Center, heal them instantly, and continue on as if nothing happened. The game creates the illusion of danger, but never actually follows through. There are no lasting consequences. The world can always be reset, but the ghost of Marowak breaks that pattern. She isn't part of that familiar loop. She doesn't faint, and she can't be caught. She's already dead. And the game makes sure you understand that this fact is absolute. The encounter isn't about winning or collecting or progressing in the usual way. It's about recognizing something irreversible. There's no reward, just a brief, uncomfortable acknowledgement of loss, something the game usually works hard to conceal. A great deal of culture is designed to distract us from the inevitability of death, or in the case of a product meant for children, to prevent the user from even becoming aware of it as a general possibility. In creative endeavors, this repressive effort leads to thematic tension wherever it is applied, because death is all around us. Plants die, animals die, celebrities die, and so it's almost obscene not to acknowledge it in some way. We subsequently transfigure our fear of death into the symbolic visage of the ghost. At face value, the Marowak's death is a trope, a brief, somber interlude in an otherwise upbeat game about cute little monsters and friendship and winning badges. But there is a more abstract level in which it registers as a political memory. The mother who dies in this tower, a Marowak executed by Team Rocket while shielding her child, reads less like a creature and more like an unconscious articulation of something much deeper. Specifically, she can be read as a stand-in for something larger that started to show signs of decay around the same time Pokemon emerged. The Marowak in that tower is a symbol you didn't know you recognized. Call it the death of the mother in the post-war imaginary, a figure that stabilized the West after 1945, wages that rose steadily, mortgages you could handle, institutions that invested in the future, long-term careers you could predict, a sheltered zone built out of growth, education and infrastructure funded by the state, a tacit promise that if you did your part, the system would do the rest. Of course, this promise was never truly universal. It excluded many marginalized groups whose labor was exploited while their access to stability remained contingent, continually deferred, or outright denied. But for those inside that safe little bubble, this arrangement created something akin to a comforting womb, which hinged on the continued sustenance of the mother. A protected space where middle-class children could believe that any problem, economic, social, even existential, could be solved by learning more, working harder, and later, when the erosion became more apparent, building back better. In Pokemon, this ideology is artfully encoded in the game's central mechanic. Work hard to render the unknown into information, and mastery will follow. Every wild encounter is a puzzle that can be solved. It is the absolute epitome of game theory itself. While the game theoretical worldview reduces everything to players and the moves on the board available to them, Lavender Town breaks that pedagogy. The mother is gone. No amount of grinding or savvy gamesmanship can reverse it. The player has to recognize a boundary that's not just difficult, but absolute. The very system that trains you to treat all aspects of the world as fundamentally solvable introduces a final limit: death. Over the course of the past 50 years, something has curdled in the global imagination, and we, the players of history, are left with the long gray tale of the aftermath. Frozen wages, broken institutions, fragile identities, the gradual hollowing out of public life. We live with the aftercare, the bureaucracy of loss. The state still exists, but mostly to manage decline, appealing to nostalgia at times, staving off collapse, theatrical demonstrations of power which fade in the public memory faster than the state can keep up with, all the while distributing the minimum dosage of order necessary to keep things from spiraling out completely. And increasingly, the caretakers are not competent enough to keep things from coming apart at the seams. In this context, the death of the Marowak hits you like an elegy. Not just for the creature itself, of course, but for the world that once made the game's logic feel plausible. You can't catch her, you can't train her, you can't use her. She registers only as seen in your Pokedex, never owned. She is an interruption to the status quo. You encounter a ghost that refuses to become data. You are confronted by an event that cannot be optimized, monetized, or turned into more content. It cannot be stored in the box, can't be renamed, and it cannot be sorted. Let's backtrack a bit, because the sequence of events matters. When you first enter the tower in Lavender Town, you encounter the aforementioned ghosts. As stated, these are not standard Pokemon encounters. The game renders them as vague, featureless specters. When you try to engage, the text reads, "Ghost appeared, but it's a ghost." As stated, your Pokemon are too scared to move. The battle system breaks down entirely. You can't fight, nor can you catch them. You can only run away. The standard rules of the game are suspended for a time. Pokemon is signaling to you something important. You're not ready to perceive what's really going on here. You don't have the tools. The only way to move forward is to leave the tower entirely, cross the city, and enter the casino, a gleaming monument to capital. Underneath this monument, in the rocket hideout, you recover the Silph scope, a device built by a corporation. Bring it back to the tower, and suddenly, what was once a ghost now becomes a ghastly, or a haunter, or the restless spirit of the maternal Marowak. The shapeless is given form. The unknown becomes inventory. The cryptid becomes commodity. I'll show myself out. Each of these Pokemon reflects something different about the neoliberal psyche. Ghastly is spectral, but weak, an insubstantial haze. This is the everyday ideological fog of neoliberalism. It confuses, it mystifies, but it lacks the strength to stand alone. On its own, it's mostly harmless. Its power is in how it obscures. Zizek would, of course, have a field day with this. Haunter is stronger, more charismatic, with a mischievous grin. This is the ironic detachment of the neoliberal subject who treats everything like a game or a bit. Haunter hides its fangs behind humor, but it can paralyze and devour, its ideology dressed up as play. It is the embodiment of the carnivalesque, as Bakhtin described it. The Marowak, by contrast, is something else entirely. You don't catch it. You can't. It's already dead. It appears only once, blocking the stairwell, possessed by maternal rage. It is a pure exception in the system, a spirit of grievance that refuses to be repackaged. Marowak is the return of the repressed. She must be put to rest before the story can continue. What binds all of this together is the Silph scope itself. It is the apparatus that makes the intangible, well, tangible. But it doesn't reveal the truth. It enforces an interpretation. It reduces ghosts to manageable forms, reinterprets memory as risk, and packages grief as data. It allows the game to move on, not by resolving the trauma, but by assimilating it into a frame the player can interact with. That is how ideology works in the 21st century. Not by hiding things, but by naming them in order to neutralize their power. If Lavender Town is where the illusion breaks, Celadon's casino is where it's perfected. The Game Corner doesn't just introduce gambling mechanics, it clarifies what Pokemon has been all along. A system of artificial scarcity engineered around compulsion. Every jaunt through the tall grass mimics a slot pull, another chance to possess something rare, something exceptional, something to hold over your friends' heads. Under the pretense of exploration and mastery, the game fosters a subtle behavioral loop. Search, capture, optimize, repeat. The casino simply makes the metaphor literal. It's not a deviation from the core mechanic, it is the core mechanic. Even the trading cards carry this DNA. There's always something just out of reach positioned to keep you hooked. An ultra rare card, a shiny variant, the missing entry in your collection. And when the first 150 had exhausted their novelty, expansion became the point. Not just new regions and new Pokemon, but new forms of scarcity, new content to monetize, new systems to optimize, infinite growth by design. Pokemon is often framed as a franchise about friendship or discovery, but structurally, it's about control, accumulation, and market logic. To be sure, Lavender Town interrupts the loop, but Celadon reveals it for what it is: gambling rebranded for children. All those hours compulsively playing the slots, But eventually, you have to go back to Lavender Town to face the unknown. This time, you have a device that makes the dead legible, but identification only enables you to progress. It cannot restore what was lost along the way. The Silph scope doesn't just banish death, it gives it a label. That's the pattern outside the cartridge too. Institutions translate grief into categories, metrics, and action items, and then send you back into the loop. In the anime, Lavender Town becomes just another detour. Spooky, sure, but ultimately safe. The ghosts are mischievous, they're jokers. In the end, they really just want to have someone to play with. The danger ends up being comic relief. No one dies, though Ash and Pikachu do have a brief out-of-body experience resulting in a confrontation with the sublime. Poetic, to be sure, but not as dark as the game's depiction of Lavender Town. Ultimately, Ash befriends Haunter, who later assists him in defeating the gym leader Sabrina and her psychic-type Pokémon. The whole experience is really just another rung on the ladder to mastery. Conversely, the game doesn't flinch. It leaves the death intact. A ghost you can't catch, a tower full of gravestones, a melody that sounds like mourning, looping endlessly on a Game Boy speaker. In a world defined by control and categorization, this is the one thing you cannot contain. So why did it resonate so deeply? Why did the story metastasize into an urban legend, an ultrasonic frequency that makes kids sick? Why this particular fiction? Because it mapped onto something already happening, a creeping sense, perhaps hard to name at the time, that something in the world had quietly broken. By the mid-2000s, the modern internet was beginning to take shape, not as a tool for exploration or knowledge, but as an immersive environment, a habitat. Platforms stopped trying to direct users towards specific goals or community interactions and instead began to optimize for something more ambient. Engagement. Not understanding, not coherence, and certainly not the truth. Just the ability to hold a person's attention, to keep them scrolling, clicking, watching, reacting, anything but leaving the application. And it worked. As platforms refined their models, users spent more time immersed in their little online worlds. But it wasn't immersion in the enriching sense, it was frictionless exposure, infinite content without conclusion, stimulus without synthesis. The reward loop no longer required resolution, it only required continuation. Over time, the effects began to accumulate, a flattening of affect, a loss of orientation. People didn't fall into full-blown psychosis, but they didn't feel well. The symptoms became familiar, even banal. Low-level dissociation, vague insecurity, a creeping sense of unreality. Not a rupture per se, not a total breakdown, just a quiet scrambling of the coordinates. A dull ache of meaninglessness, dressed up as novelty, a persistent hum of unease. The Lavender Town myth was eerie, but it was also explanatory. It offered a theory, however absurd, for what people already felt but couldn't quite articulate. The idea that a Game Boy melody could induce dizziness, nausea, even madness, was not merely a campfire story for digital natives. It was an allegory, a fable about interface and influence. It suggested that the medium itself might not be entirely inert, that the technology was not just a passive conduit for experience, but an active participant in shaping it. In a moment when online life was accelerating, expanding, and encroaching upon every form of attention, the myth seemed to say, maybe this isn't entirely random. Maybe the architecture is the message. Maybe the sickness isn't an accident, but a signal, a clue buried in the noise. Maybe the thing that's making you feel unwell isn't inside you at all. There was no hidden frequency, of course, no ghost in the machine, but there didn't need to be. The malaise wasn't the product of a malfunctioning system. It was the product of design. What the Lavender Town myth captured, however obliquely, was that the system was functioning exactly as intended. Its logic is indifferent to well-being. It was built to capture attention, not to nourish, to optimize for engagement, not meaning. And in that sense, the horror wasn't a bug. It was a feature. We live in what might be called a caretaker society, a social formation whose primary function is no longer to build or transform, but rather to maintain appearances, to paper over the contradictions with band-aids, duct tape, and smooth talking. It is an apparatus of preservation rather than creation, oriented around the management of decline rather than the pursuit of growth or collective flourishing. Lacking the political imagination or structural capacity to resolve its foundational contradictions, our ideological apparatus instead turns to simulation. Layers upon layers of simulation, in fact. Rituals of continuity, gestures of stability, aesthetic reassurances in place of material guarantees. The future, once offered as a shared horizon, has been evacuated of substance. What remains is the endless repackaging of the past. Remakes, reboots, recycled franchises, the same familiar icons reissued on smaller, more private screens. A cultural loop that flattens time into product cycles. Nostalgia becomes the dominant aesthetic. Not because the past was better per se, but because it's safer to reproduce something that already worked than to risk invention. The narrative becomes nothing really changes, and that's the point. We are conditioned to no longer have societal ambitions. This is the world we inherit after the mother disappears, the symbolic caretaker of the post-war order, the ideological womb of Western prosperity. That arrangement, historically specific and materially bounded, promised stable employment, upward mobility, and institutional trust. It was a compact that sustained the illusion of linear progress through homeownership, pensions, and other predictable life scripts. But that bargain has eroded. What remains are institutions repurposed to manage contraction, school systems that warehouse rather than uplift, healthcare systems that administer scarcity, and political systems that mediate paralysis. These institutions now exist to defer rupture. They curate decline and call it governance. They preserve facades of order while quietly offloading risk onto individuals. The language of resilience replaces the promise of security. In this caretaker mode, survival is the only form of success possible, and even that is unevenly distributed. Japan, the birthplace of Pokémon, has reached this phase of societal entropy earlier than most. Long before the West reckoned with its own stagnation, Japan was already living it. An aging population, a plummeting birth rate, entire towns hollowed out by demographic collapse. Youth became scarce, and with it, the future became an abstraction. Alienation was no longer a fringe condition, but the atmospheric norm. Hikikomori, those who withdrew entirely from society, offered an unintentional symbol. Not rebellion, but quiet surrender to a world without guarantees. The United States and Europe are now following suit. They arrive more slowly, more noisily, with all the theatrics of liberal democracy in disrepair. But the trend is essentially the same. Institutions calcify, fertility declines, trust evaporates. The managerial class finds new ways to optimize a shrinking pie. Japan was not anomalous, it was prescient, the ghost in the tower. A nation haunted by its own past successes, moving silently into the condition that now stalks the rest of the developed world. Modernity promised mastery through measurement. It built its legitimacy on the dream that all phenomena could be rendered into data, charted, categorized, and controlled. This was the epistemology of empire, industry, and infrastructure, a belief in the ultimate legibility of the world. The Enlightenment spirit dressed in lab coats and spreadsheets, and for a time it delivered, on paper at least. It made the world calculable. But what happens when the map is complete? When everything has been sorted into boxes, when every metric is monitored in real time? What happens when there are no new territories to chart, only the maintenance of existing systems? Systems that no longer function as promised. The dream of mastery becomes an obligation, a treadmill of optimization, a quiet exhaustion in the face of endless feedback. We count our steps, we log our meals, we track our heart rates, our REM cycles, our moods. We generate terabytes of behavioral exhaust. But the numbers don't make us okay. They don't cohere into meaning. They offer no shelter from the creeping sense of unraveling. Quantification becomes ritual, performed not to illuminate the world but to keep anxiety at bay. A desperate fidelity to a worldview that has outlived its explanatory power. And so we live inside the terminal phase of modernity's knowledge project, not a triumphant mastery of nature, but a slow, recursive drift into our own simulations. It is no coincidence then that young people gravitate towards media that mirrors the psychic texture of decline. The recent proliferation of analog horror, dreamcore edits, and liminal aesthetics isn't just a stylistic drift or ironic detour. It's not a fashion statement, it's more so a cultural symptom, a collective attempt to articulate the contours of psychic disintegration in late capitalism. These forms emerge because the prevailing narratives no longer hold. The old genres, heroes' journeys, coming-of-age arcs, tidy dystopias, these feel dishonest in a world where nothing really concludes, where decline isn't cinematic but more so ambient. Analog horror doesn't scare you with monsters. It unsettles you by presenting the world as already broken. Liminality doesn't offer transcendence, it lingers in the airport at 2 a.m., the vacant strip mall at dusk. These images resonate because they externalize a specific generational experience. What it feels like to inherit institutions designed for a different century, to navigate social scripts that no longer correspond to reality. What it feels like to live in a system that is collapsing in slow motion, but still demands your participation. Lavender Town's theme endures because it predates this aesthetic turn while predicting it perfectly. The melody doesn't try to frighten, it's simply mournful. There is no jump scare, only the feeling that something essential has already disappeared. It sounds like a requiem for a social contract that was quietly revoked, a shelter that was promised but never built, a nursery gone cold. To enter Lavender Town is to step into a space that was designed for someone else, someone whose future still existed. The track is elegiac, not because a single death has occurred, but because something is dying continually, and we are asked to keep going as though that loss is not happening, as though the world is still legible, as though the structure is still intact. It's a kind of mourning for futures we were taught to expect, and a grasping towards new languages that might explain what happened. We are told to optimize, to measure, to track. Every impulse, every behavior, every bodily function is now seen as a potential data point. The logic is simple. What gets measured gets managed. This framework descends from Taylorist industrial management, time and motion studies, standardization, control charts, but it's now applied to life itself. It rests on a fatal assumption that everything that matters can be made legible. But what matters is not always quantifiable. Joy, sorrow, longing, regret, these don't present cleanly as metrics. They resist tidy representation. The quantification of human life does not deepen our understanding of it. It partitions and flattens it. It encourages us to treat the self as a dashboard to be optimized, rather than a subject to be lived. And in doing so, it privileges the visible over the ineffable. We begin to forget how much of life occurs in a kind of negative space, in silence, waiting, in memory, in grief. Lavender Town does something rare in this context. It refuses the logic of instrumentalization. It offers no reward, no advantage, no strategic use. It cannot be mastered or gamified. The fear it inspires is not the fear of danger, but the fear of irreducibility. It insists on something outside the loop of control. What Lavender Town does, without any flourishes, without artifice, is place you in the presence of death. Not as a spectacle, not as an encounter to conquer, but as absence, an absence that lingers. It breaks the game's loop of progression and feedback. It says, there's nothing really to collect here. There is no prize for witnessing this. In a game that celebrates capture, categorization, and growth, Lavender Town interrupts that process. It gives you something you cannot name, cannot use, can't store in your inventory. It offers no closure, only the persistent feeling that something has been lost. And that, much more than any haunted frequency, is what really unsettled people. Because deep down we know we're living in a system that is haunted by unmet promises of progress, of prosperity, stability, haunted by debt that compounds faster than meaning, haunted by people we've lost and the loved ones we're too busy or too exhausted to mourn, haunted by the creeping sense that time itself has come unglued. that we are floating through a present no longer tethered to any coherent future. Pokémon gave children a sense of mastery, a world where everything had a name, a type, a set of stats, everything could be caught, ordered, and understood. But Lavender Town broke that illusion. It whispered something different. Not everything can be known. Not every encounter is a transaction. Some ghosts do not want to be caught. Some grief cannot be resolved. The urban legend said a song hurt children, that there was a frequency buried in the soundtrack, one that made the game feel cursed. But the truth is more ordinary and simultaneously more disturbing. The real frequency was the one we were already tuned to, a system designed not to support us, but to extract from us our time, our attention, our affect, a loop that keeps us clicking, scrolling, consuming, but never really arriving anywhere. And so the tower remains, not just the dead mother, but all of the forgotten things, the abandoned dreams, the broken social contracts, the people who vanished between updates, each ghost asking, quietly, insistently, "Have you forgotten how to mourn? Are you still pretending this is just a game?" It interrupted the fantasy. It introduced death not as a plot point, but as a limit, something unquantifiable, untradeable, and ultimately unresolvable. In a game defined by collection, by the conversion of difference into mere utility, this was a rupture, a failure of the system to accommodate loss. It asked the player not to fight, not to win, but to stop and acknowledge and mourn. And that's what made it feel cursed. Because the rest of the game, like the rest of our culture, tells us the exact opposite, that every attack has a counter. Every pained experience of labor results in a product, that every absence can be filled, if not with meaning, then at least with content. But Lavender Town refused that logic. Lavender Town wasn't an aberration or a mistake per se. It just operates on a different register because it refuses to translate a great loss into mere utility. It struck a nerve because it anticipated something we hadn't yet fully entered, a world of ambient grief, deferred mourning, and systems that run not on resolution, but on repetition. It forecast the emotional texture of the 21st century, not quite a jump scare, more so like a low hum, a feeling you carry without knowing where it started. Lavender Town wasn't cursed, it just told the truth too early. We're all in Lavender Town now. Alright folks, happy Halloween. That wraps it up for this installment of Nightmare Masterclass. If you want to support me on a monthly basis, you can do so at patreon.com/Nightmare Masterclass. If you've made it this far, thanks so much for watching. And, of course, as always, have a good night.